Hello, I'm William Marcus. In 2009, I was lucky enough to meet Great Falls resident and supercentenarian Walter Breunig. At the time, Walter was 112 years old and the oldest living man in the United States. It was just after breakfast, and Walter was gracious enough to give us some of his time. He shared stories about his career, his wife, and his philosophy on a long and abundant life. In the years that passed, Walter became the oldest living man in the world. With that came celebrity, something Walter was grateful of, but never really comfortable with. Hundreds turned out for his 114th birthday party. Governor Schweitzer even wore a suit and a necktie in Walter's honor, a necktie Walter had given the governor.
And I think I speak for everybody in Montana. You do us proud, Walter. Congratulations and happy birthday.
I didn't hear much applause for the governor. Let's give him a good hand.
There were gifts and accolades from representatives of the Guinness Book of World Records, from Shriners and Masons, and the mayor. Montana PBS gave Walter an Emmy he had earned for this station.
And if you can't remember me only with tears, then don't remember me at all. And to get the most out of life, we should enjoy what we have accomplished.
Happy birthday to you.
Now we're sad to say that at 114, Walter has passed away. His message was a simple one: welcome change when it comes, and be kind to one another. And Walter lived up to that. He was a genuinely kind man, and I'm glad I got to meet him. Now, in recognition of a long and productive life, and in gratitude for all that his story meant to our viewers, we present for a final time a conversation with Walter. Walter, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us today. You just got finished with breakfast?
Yeah, good breakfast.
What'd you have for breakfast?
Eggs, toast, ham, hash browns.
Yeah, that sounds great.
It's good breakfast.
Yeah. So a lot of people, I'm sure, ask you what kind of changes you've seen over your lifetime.
Well, you take the changes from no electricity, kerosene lamps. People don't realize just what you're going through. Years ago, walk to work, your father worked to work, and the biggest thing is money. You know, my father was a civil engineer. He worked a steam engine running a flour mill. Electricity, no electricity, you know. $50 a month, you know, back 1900s. Yeah, that's the way life was at that time. He didn't have nothing, he didn't expect anything. Now, everybody's got more than they ever had in their life, and they're not satisfied yet. They still want more. And they won't be satisfied till they get more.
Did you learn from your father then that you didn't need a lot to get by?
Never learned nothing from my father. He just taught us with a Ricky hickory stick. That's the way fathers were years ago. They taught their families hard going. That's what made living real tough. I look back when my mother, when she had to bake bread twice a week. Same, we used to make ice cream with a refrigerator, you know. We didn't have it very many times, 2 or 3 times a year, have ice cream. It would send me down to creamery to get cream, then go over to the ice house and get 5 cents worth of ice. They give you 1 chunk of ice, just enough to freeze the ice cream, you know. That was big stuff those days. When I first started to work in 1913 on the railroad, $50 a month, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the difference between working those days. Now, If you can get 5 days' work out of people, you're darn lucky, I'll tell you.
Were you expected to go to work when you were 13? Isn't that kind of young to start a career on the railroad?
Well, I was in the 10th grade in school when I had to quit to go to work.
And why did you have to quit to go to work?
Because my father had left home, had to feed my mother. I quit when I was 14 years old. You know where I went to work? In a bakery shop, scraping pan, $2.50 a week, and damn glad to get it. So in 1913, I went to work for the railroad. Had to work someplace. So that was a lucky place. My brother was working on the railroad a few years before that, so I suppose that's helped. But that worked during Jim Hill's days. You know, in 1915, when he passed away,
You're talking about James J. Hill, who owned the railroad, right? The
Jim Hill was the president of the Great Northern Railroad.
Right.
He used to come to town, and I'd have to hide because I wasn't 18 years old yet. He wouldn't hire anybody unless they were 18. So I'd hide out when he'd come to town. But that's the way that worked out too. When he passed away, at the funeral, he closed all employees, all trains come to a stop for 5 minutes during the start of the funeral. Mrs. Hill owned 2% of the stock of the Burlington and Great Northern. She had the controlling stock. So when the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern consolidated with the other railroad, why, she had control of it. She created the pension plan for Great Northern employees back in the 30s, before Social Security was even thought about. They got $90 a month after 70 years of work, and they forced you off. And you know, at that time, 70 years, and the average death after that, 11 years. That's as long as most people lived at that time.
You literally saw the railroads bring people to the West, bring people to Montana.
Well, in 1914, that's when Jim Hill paid for a lot of people out of Missouri and some of those towns. And when the train would come into town, you'd see those people right in the boxcar with their cattle and horses going to North Dakota and Montana. And you know that Hill paid off a lot of their expenses all the way through, because North Dakota and Montana wasn't settled in 1914. Not many people. Vacant land. And people wanted to move to get good land, which they did.
So James J. Hill paid to have them come?
He paid expenses for all of those people moving there, you bet. He was pretty good that way, you know. And he was a mean son of a gun, too. For instance, the main line used to be through Kalispell, main line railroad. He wanted to make some changes there in Kalispell, and for some reason the city wouldn't make a change. And you know what he did? He moved the railroad to Whitefish and went through the main line. Cut Kalispell off on the branch line. See, that's the way he worked.
And how long did you work for the railroad?
50 years. 1913, retired in '63. I liked railroad work and just loved it. And made the difference between liking something and not liking it. What's today's life? How long does people work in the same position? Not very long anymore.
And did you work after that, or did you retire and?
I always had 2 jobs. 2 jobs all the time.
What was your other job?
Secretary of the Masonic Lodge for years. And for a long time, I was a grievance for the Railway Clerks Union. In the 1930s, the police department wasn't even organized yet. And the committee of policemen came over and called on me, and I give them the schedules on how to get organized. And you know, the first bill that they passed, which approved by the city, was half of your salary after 20 years service.
So you have, I mean, you've lived in Great Falls since 1918.
That's right.
There are lots of characters from Great Falls history that were here at that time.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you go down to the Mint Bar, you could see Charlie Russell. Did you know Charlie Russell?
Oh, saw him lots of times. Lots of times. Nobody paid no attention to him, you know. I used to go in and kind of look over some of his stuff, pictures and cards and stuff. But people never paid much attention to him. Not at that time. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you another thing. They had right there where the Davidson building is next door here, there was a silver dollar bar. And that's just what it was. The sidewalk was filled in with silver dollars. And when people start digging them out, then they got rid of them. But that's right across from the Mint.
Mm-hmm. Did you work at the Mint Bar at one time?
No.
But you were a patron there pretty frequently, were you?
No, just went in there for, you could have soup and sandwich for 25 cents. And that was filled up every day at the Mint.
So are you saying that you never were a drinker or a smoker?
Oh, I smoked all my life.
Really?
Yeah, all my life. Cigars.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Do you still smoke today?
No, I quit in '99
Why did you quit?
because they got so expensive. And when I mentioned that to the Tribune, if I could afford the good cigars, I could probably smoke again. I got 9 boxes from all over the country, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And did you smoke them?
You darn right. Some of those, I got some from some soldiers, from lawyers in Indiana. Boy, I'll tell you, they were really $10 cigars, you know. I got one cigar this Christmas from a lady from Oregon. She sends one every year. That's a $10 cigar. I give it to somebody that appreciated it because I didn't want to start that. And you can't smoke in the building. Mm-hmm. No smoking at all.
Could we talk a bit about your family, about your wife? Where did you meet your wife?
In 1920, business got a little, well, it was 1919. Business got so tough that I couldn't hold a job in Great Falls, but I had enough seniority to go to Butte. I worked over there for 2 years before coming back to Great Falls. My wife was a railroad telegrapher, worked the same shift I did, and that's who I married.
You married 35 years?
Uh-huh. He passed away in '57.
You talked about some of the technological changes you've seen, especially in radio and television and the telephone. Do you remember the first time you used a telephone?
Yeah, I had a lot of changes. More changes than you can think of. You know, telephones, hell, in 1920, you had to call a girl when you wanted to use the telephone. You had to call the telephone office, and they would ring the number for you. You couldn't ring a direct. See the changes like that. Computers changed the life of people, changed the life of business. Without a computer, how do you suppose people would run the bank or anything today? When they put the machines on in the railroad, it took all the jobs off. We lost them all. We used to have 1,200 jobs in Great Falls on the Great Northern. Now I don't think they got 50 jobs, 60 probably, all told. All clerical positions are all gone. Where they used to make up the trains, what I had to make up trains here, they make them in Fort Worth, Texas now. That's the headquarters. They do it by computers. That's what the computer did. It ruined a lot of jobs, but at the same time created many jobs. Just like I remember when radio in the 30s, televisions in the 40s come into existence. The actors thought, hell, we're going to lose all of our jobs. Well, you know what ended up? It created more jobs than it lost. That's the way changes are. I always believed in change. Change for the good. People don't realize just what going through 100 years means. You had a lot of no automobiles. The only transportation there was the trains. No buses, no nothing like that. Everybody walked. Had to walk.
So you've made it to 112 years. What is, if somebody had asked you, what's your secret? And I'm sure I'm sure they have asked
everybody,
you that.
Even the doctors up at the hut, asked that same question. What are you doing? Well, there's nothing I do that makes. That fellow upstairs, the one that's running the traffic, and the time comes, that's when you go. But until that time, who knows? That question comes up all the time. How do you know you're going to live that long? How does anybody know they're going to live the next day? You don't know. Nothing certain in this life. And that's why I like changes. Changes. All for the best.
So every day in the radio, in the news, you hear about change that happens in a country. Well, what is the most memorable news item that you ever heard on the radio or read in the paper?
Well, I suppose there's a lot of things on radio that, especially when the banks closed in 29, President Roosevelt closed all the banks all over the United States. You probably don't remember.
I don't.
Closed them all.
I've read about it, though.
Closed them all. When Hoover was president in the 29, the Democrats and the Republicans were fighting like hell. They wouldn't give Hoover nothing. And so when Roosevelt got in there, that was his first order, to close the banks, because they were one after another was closed. All the banks in Great Falls shut down for reorganization. The only one that opened up and paid in full was the First National. Some banks never opened up after that. And when they did open up, all of the money you got was 15 or 20% of what you put in there. Because there was no guarantee in banks years ago. And and when they reorganized, that's when the guarantee of 100,000 in the bank. I think that's been increased now to 200,000. So that's what happens today.
So everybody talks that our current economic problems are just like the Great Depression, or that we're headed that way. Do you think that?
Well, you haven't any idea what that depression was in the 30s, when the stock market went broke, in 29. Stock market went broke. That's when Roosevelt come to office. There was over 14 million out of work. No business was operating at all. They're all closed down. People coming through on the boxcars looking for work, no work. Wasn't any. No work at all. You haven't any idea. Families had to move in with each other in order to be able to live, because probably only one person in the family was working. Now, look what's happening. There are more women working than men. That's the difference between now and then. I don't know just how long people can expect to get some of these high wages. Now they were talking about automobile companies. They make $73 an hour. Think of that. That's over $500 a day. And they're trying to get them to lower their wages. And the union refused to do it. And I don't blame them. They signed up. But what's going to happen to them, if the government don't furnish money, some of those outfits were going to close down. And those people will be out of work entirely. And during the Depression, now railroad employees all over the United States, we had to take a 10% cut in wages. And it wasn't, and years afterwards, you got it back. Yep.
You've lived through how many presidents?
Since Wilson was first president,
Wilson.
I voted for.
And who, of all those presidents, who's your favorite?
Well, I think Roosevelt done the most when he created Social Security and made several changes. But the Second War, if it hadn't opened up at that time, Roosevelt would have had a tough time. It's just like this young new president's going to go in. He's going to have a heck of a time, I'll tell you that. He thinks he's going to satisfy all the people in the country. He better think again, because it's not that easy. Congress is the one that passes all bills, not the president.
So you look forward to getting up every day?
Yeah, I do. I look forward to what I'm going to eat. I know what I'm going to have. Have a menu a week ahead of time. You bet. And if you don't think about, as I said before, if you don't think about some of these things, you lose your perspective. If you don't use your mind a little bit, it's going to deteriorate to beat the devil. Always has. The more you use your mind and your body, the longer you're going to understand what's going on in the country. And don't just sit down in the rocking chair, because you do, you won't last too long. That's the trouble. But a lot of people, they forgot who they are. You got to be sure that you like yourself. Everybody should like each other, Like yourself. That's life, I think. All the way through. You people same thing. You should like each other, like people.
So someone who has watched the news and has been active in politics and in the union, how would you counsel future generations to be a part of their country?
All in all, this is a beautiful world and good for the people that's in it. You know, life is a school. Everybody learns from life what's going on. And if they pay attention to everything that people do, especially helping people, that's one big thing. A lot of people think they're born for themselves. I don't think that. I believe that we're here to help other people all the way through. And I've always tried to do that.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with
Well,
you, and
thank
we
you.
appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much for asking. You bet.
A conversation with Walter was made possible